Welcome back. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has condemned India's plan to implement the Israeli model in occupied Kashmir. Earlier, Indian General Counsel in the US, Sandeep Chakravarti, said Delhi will build settlements for return of Hindus to the valley. In a tweet, Imran Khan said this shows the fascist and radical Hindutva ideology of the Indian government. Khan said international powers are silent over Indian atrocities in the valley because of trade interests. Talking about the Israeli model, the Indian envoy said if the Israeli people can do it, Indians can also do it. Chakravarti said Hindu settlers will be able to occupy all of the land in Kashmir, just like Israel gradually occupied Palestine. In Iraq, at least 8 people have been killed in unrest in Baghdad and Karbala. The deaths were occurred in explosions and large-scale protests. 6 people were killed and 15 others wounded when 3 separate explosions hit Baghdad. No group has claimed responsibility for the attacks. In the meantime, 2 protesters were killed during clashes in the capital in continuing violent anti-government protests. Dozens have also been wounded in the southern cities of Basra and Samawa. Medics said 60 people were wounded when security forces fired tear gas grenades in the city of Hilla. So far, 340 people have died in the anti-government protests which broke out in October. A delegation of the Afghan Taliban led by Mullah Baradar Akhund met Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif in Tehran. In a tweet, the Taliban spokesman for its political office in Qatar, Sohail Shaheen, said the two sides discussed the Afghan peace process. He said Iranian officials promised to address the issue of Afghan refugees living in Iran. The peace process hit a snag in September when US President Donald Trump called off the talks with the Taliban over the killing of an American soldier in Afghanistan. Pakistan, China and Russia have called for the resumption of talks between the Taliban and the US. The US says it has received nearly 20,000 messages from Iranians about human rights abuses in Iran. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the US will keep sanctions on Iranian officials responsible for human rights abuses. He was talking to the press in Washington. Pompeo urged Iranians to send information about human rights abuses. He said the US will support Iran's people in their struggle for a brighter future. Earlier, the US Treasury Department sanctioned Iran's information minister over the blockade of internet services during protests. Amnesty International says over 143 people have been killed in demonstrations because of the use of force by police. But Tehran says only 5 people died during protests. Israel has carried out more airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. Israeli army spokesperson Avishai Adrei said warplanes struck Hamas buildings in the city of Khan Yunis. No casualties have been reported so far. The Israeli army said it struck a series of military targets in response to rockets fired from the Palestinian enclave. It said a weapons manufacturing site and underground infrastructure were targeted. 36 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces in violation of a ceasefire agreed on November 14th. In Palestine, Prime Minister Mohammad Shaitai says Palestinians will never accept the US recognition of Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. He was speaking to a crowd while leading a protest rally in Ramallah. Demonstrations were held across the West Bank where Israeli troops fired tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse them. Major protests also took place in Hebron, Nablus and other cities where clashes erupted between youths and the Israeli army. The Palestinian Red Crescent said over 60 people have been wounded in the clashes. Since Mike Pompeo's statement, the EU, United Nations and others have stressed they continue to see the settlements as illegal. In Syria, a car bomb has killed at least 17 people and wounded 20 others in Turkish-controlled city of Ras Al Ain. A number of vehicles were also destroyed in the attack, which Turkey's defense ministry is blaming on Kurdish fighters. Turkey took control of the city after its military offensive in October. Ankara stopped its operation against Kurdish fighters after 2 separate accords with Washington and Moscow. Lebanon's outgoing Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri says he does not want to lead the next government. In a statement, Hariri said he would not take the blame for delaying the formation of a new administration. The Prime Minister resigned last month, bowing to popular pressure from protesters across Lebanon who are demanding a complete overhaul of the system. Hariri's sudden announcement will come as a blow to President Michel Aoun, Hezbollah and the Amal movement. Together, they were pinning their hopes on Hariri's support to establish a techno-political administration in the country. Lebanon's bitterly divided political leaders have yet to name a new premier or form a new government. The U.S. Congress has invited President Donald Trump to its first impeachment hearing on December 4th. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler says Trump could either attend or stop complaining about the process. Democrats are investigating allegations of quid pro quo by Trump with Ukrainian President Zelensky for a personal political favor. Multiple government witnesses have testified at this month's impeachment hearings held by the Intelligence Panel. The House Judiciary Committee will soon take over the impeachment probe from the Intelligence Committee. Democrats are aiming for a final House vote by Christmas, which would set the stage for a likely Senate trial in January. U.S. President Donald Trump says he will designate Mexican drug cartels as terrorists for their role in trafficking people and narcotics. This prompted a speedy request for talks by Mexico. In an interview, Trump said the designation procedure is not easy, but they are well into it. Soon afterwards, Mexico's foreign ministry said it will seek a high-level meeting with the U.S. State Department. Mexico has long been besieged by deadly violence, with drug cartels and criminal gangs fighting for control of territory and markets. In Colombia, protest leaders have called a new general strike after talks with President Iván Duque failed. The president has now convened a meeting with the National Strike Committee to address corruption, economic inequality, and other woes. The death of a teenage demonstrator added fuel to the protest movement as protests entered their sixth consecutive day. In a statement, the committee promised to increase the intensity of the strike as a tribute to Dylan Cruz. The demonstrators have also demanded that the government purify the police. The protests have left 4 dead, including Dylan Cruz, and wounded 500 people. A series of resignations has rocked the heart of Prime Minister Joseph Muscat's government in Malta. His chief aide Keith Schembri stepped down amid reports he was being questioned by police. The tourism minister Conrad Mizzi also resigned, while the economy minister Chris Cardona suspended himself. All 3 men have denied any wrongdoing. Each of the officials who stepped down are said to be linked to the murder of Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia in October 2017. The Caruana inquiry intensified when a suspected middleman was pardoned. The suspect Melba Theuma was given immunity by the government in return for information about the killing of the journalist. In Albania, a 6.4 magnitude earthquake shook the capital of Tirana, killing at least 21 people and injuring 600 others. The earthquake is the strongest to hit the country in decades. The Albanian Defense Ministry says a person died after jumping out of a building during the earthquake. The bodies of 3 other victims were pulled from the wreckage of 2 collapsed buildings in Durrës. A ministry spokeswoman said 2 women were found in the rubble of an apartment building in the northern village of Thumain. Firefighters and the army are helping people trapped under the rubble. French and American troops are conducting joint operations on the Mali-Burkina Faso border. They aim to assert control over the area and neutralize militants who have been wreaking havoc in the region since 2012. But their military alliance is plagued by a myriad of problems. More in this report.
Thousands have died in the African Sahel since the 2012 coup d'etat in Mali. The conflict has acted as an incubator for extremism in the region and spilled into neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger. Now, French troops are working with the G5 Sahel force to drive militancy out of the area. The G5S includes Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania and Niger.
We regularly receive intelligence, but the difficulty is in reaching the target quickly. We often reach the target and they've had time to escape.
But this war won't be easy. Not only does the terrain here favor the terrorists, there are also major differences between French and G5S troops.
They don't have the same logistics or equipment as us, but they have important knowledge of the ground and they want to work.
The main difference is in training and supplies. Some days the G5S troops even have to go to the French soldiers and ask for rations. 170 G5S soldiers have been killed in attacks by militants since this September alone. In comparison, there have only been 41 French casualties in the Sahel since 2013.
We're taking a short break. Stay with us. President Arif Alvi says Pakistan has played pivotal role for peace in Africa and looks forward to enhancing relations with African countries. Speaking at the Envoys Conference, Alvi said Pakistan and African countries share many problems which they should fight together. Alvi said the two sides need to fight poverty and ignorance collectively. The conference focused on Pakistan's foreign policy regarding African countries. Earlier, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi also addressed the conference. Qureshi said promotion of tourism and enhancing trade ties are Pakistan's top priorities. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 41 people have been killed in Kinshasa after days of heavy rains caused flooding and landslides. Officials warn the death toll may rise. Authorities say a rescue operation for people who went missing in the floods is underway. The government has declared an emergency after the flooding displaced at least 50,000 people in the capital. Income disparity in South Korea has turned a huge number of students against President Moon Jae-in. Young people are calling for the president to shift his policy focus from North Korea to them. This report has all the background story.
The old Korean concept of dirt spoons, those born to low-income families, and gold spoons, people from better-off families, has recently exploded onto the political scene. 26-year-old university student Kim Jae-hoon is among those who have borne the brunt of the country's deepening inequality.
I can't complain that we have different starting lines. It is fine that I start from a different level, but I am upset with someone getting perks.
Young, low-income voters like Kim have deserted President Moon in record numbers. The president concedes he had fallen short on his promises to improve employment and social justice.
I'm aware of it and fully understand that people are disappointed as the government has not been able to solve problems related to various unfair issues. More and extra effort will be needed on that.
The change in direction sees many young students now protesting against Moon.
The current government began its term with a slogan saying, "Opportunity will be equal, process will be fair, and results will be righteous." These are just speculative. They rather showed the opposite things. That's why many young people feel betrayed.
Gold spoons have replaced gold rings as the most popular gift item, traditionally given at the first birthdays of newborn children, wishing them a wealthy life. Analysts say the trend reflects the bitter hopelessness of the growing army of young dirt spoons.
In Southern California, thousands of residents have fled their homes as a wind-driven wildfire ravaged parts of Santa Barbara. The county officials declared a local emergency as the fire spread through the Los Padres National Forest. Spokesman Mike Eliasson said over 63,000 people have been evacuated and nearly 2,500 structures threatened. He said no injuries have been reported, but one building has been damaged. It is not yet clear how the blaze started. A powerful snowstorm has swept across Colorado and into the U.S. Midwest, blocking roads and causing flight cancellations. The storm has dumped a foot of snow and buffeted the Denver area with wind gusting at 45 miles per hour. Nearly 500 flights have been cancelled and more than 350 delayed at Denver International Airport. The American Automobile Association says snow will probably change Thursday's Thanksgiving plans for 55 million travelers. The UN warns global temperatures could rise to over 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels this century. The warning follows the release of a UN report saying greenhouse gas emissions surged to a record high in 2018. This report has all the details.
Scientists across the world agree that climate change poses a serious threat to the world and future generations. The latest UN emissions gap report says greenhouse gas emissions surged to a record level last year. It says global temperatures could rise by more than twice the levels envisioned by the 2015 Paris Climate Accords. The UN warns temperatures can be expected to rise by over 3% this century, bringing wide-ranging and destructive impacts on the climate.
We had little hope a couple of years ago that the CO2 part of the emissions had basically been stable for a few years, and we hoped that that indicated a stabilization. But in 2017 and 2018, we don't have the 19 numbers yet. Emissions have been going up, and the CO2 emissions have been going up the last year by 2%.
At current levels, greenhouse emissions must be cut by over 7.5% a year between 2020 and 2030 to meet the targets set by the Paris Climate Accords.
Essentially what we have seen in this report and what you are seeing, that at this time, had we acted in 2010, we would have had to reduce our emissions by 3.2% a year, or by 3.3% a year. Now, because of climate procrastination, which we have essentially had during these 10 years, we are looking at a 7.6% reduction every year.
The World Meteorological Organization says global temperatures could rise by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius by the end of the 21st century. Countries face a 2020 deadline to set more ambitious emissions reduction pledges made under the Paris Climate Accords.
Asian stock markets have edged higher after US President Donald Trump's positive remarks about trade talks with China. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index and the Kospi in Seoul are trading about 0.5% higher. But investors are treading carefully, just in case trade negotiations between Washington and Beijing again collapse at the last hurdle. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.